What is PP interval on the ECG? PP interval is the interval between the P waves due to atrial depolarization. It is measured from the onset of one P wave to the onset of the next P wave. We can calculate the atrial rate from the PP interval. In sinus rhythm, PP and RR intervals are the same. When the PP and RR intervals are the same, atrial and ventricular rates are not calculated separately. But when there is atrioventricular dissociation as in complete heart block, atrial rate is different from the ventricular rate and is calculated separately. In complete heart block, PP interval is shorter than the RR interval. This means that the atrial rate is higher than the ventricular rate. In ventricular tachycardia with interference AV dissociation, PP interval is longer than the RR interval, indicating that the atrial rate is lower than the ventricular rate. Both these intervals are nearly identical in isorhythmic AV dissociation. PP interval is measured in milliseconds. Atrial rate is calculated by dividing 60,000 by the measured PP interval. 60,000 milliseconds corresponds to 1 minute. Hence, atrial rate obtained is in beats per minute. Alternatively, PP interval can be measured in millimeters. With a standard ECG paper speed of 25 millimeters per second, atrial rate is obtained by dividing 1500 by the PP interval in millimeters. This approach is more commonly adopted while calculating the atrial rate from the ECG, as it avoids conversion of intervals initially into milliseconds. In most of the modern devices, there is provision for automatic calculation of heart rates, but it seldom calculates the atrial rate separately. PP interval can vary slightly in normal individuals from cycle to cycle due to respiratory sinus arrhythmia. The atrial rate increases in inspiration and decreases in expiration. This is because of cyclical changes in left ventricular output with respiration and reflex changes in heart rate. In normal adults, respiratory sinus arrhythmia can cause a variation in PP interval of up to 3 mm, that is 120 milliseconds. Respiratory sinus arrhythmia is quite common in normal children and is of no clinical significance. Exaggerated respiratory sinus arrhythmia is a common cause for irregular pulse in children. Another rare form of non-respiratory sinus arrhythmia which occurs in complete heart block is known as ventriculophasic sinus arrhythmia. Here are the references of my talk. Please subscribe to this channel on YouTube by clicking on the red subscribe button seen just below this video on the right side. Subscribe button will be visible on the video also if you hover the computer mouse over the channel icon on the upper part of the video.